Okay, I have to tell you I had a lot of fun writing this particular week. I have entitled it Weeding, Pruning, and Composting. So I have to tell you that one of the hardest things for me to learn when I first started gardening, I had a massive, beautiful organic garden up in the Seattle area. And one of the hardest things for me to learn was that weeding is never ending. And cultivating the soil is really important to keep the weeds down, but you have to keep weeding. And so this is true in our own lives. Weeding is a never-ending project. Although the more we cultivate the soil, the more our weeds are easier to pull out, and actually the less of them that grow. A lot of people ask me, well, why do I still go there? Why do I still think that? What's wrong with me? Nothing. There is nothing wrong with you. It's just that the truth is weed seeds are constantly being blown in, and they are to a certain extent inherent in the soil. They've been there all along. And so the same thing is true. We have negative thoughts, or we go to old places, not because we need to learn anything new about it, but just because it's a habit. That's it. And so we have to just keep weeding it out. Weeding in our consciousness is, well, in terms of weeding, pruning, and composting, one of the things that I think is really valuable to look at is that all three of these things have an inner aspect and an outer aspect. All of them have something that we do in consciousness within our own psyche, and things that we need to do in the human experience in our actions and behaviors. And the truth is we need both of these things to fully engage in this process in our own lives. We have to do the inner work and the outer work. They're both required. So in weeding, we have to weed out the consciousness and the old ideas and the false thoughts and the habitual places that we go, I just can't do it. See, I'm always, not doing it right, or wherever it is that we go. And then we have to also weed out the behaviors that are associated with those thoughts. The good news is that when we weed on the inside, it automatically weeds out some behaviors. And when we weed on the outside, it automatically affects the inner thoughts and continues to rewrite the patterns in our brain. So they both support the other. Doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter which you do. They both have to be done. This is a reflection of the fact that we are being the essential nature, with all the qualities of the infinite, as our true essential nature, and we're becoming. We're becoming the greater yet to be that we can. We're becoming, growing as human beings and as human experiences. All of that is the becoming. And the being and the becoming, they work together. And you can't have one without the other. So, just like in our weeding and pruning and composting, there's an inner and an outer. So in weeding, the hardest thing for me to learn about weeding is that it's also about weeding out excess seeds that are sprouting. I will never forget the first time I planted a whole row of carrots, and it said, put the seeds in that row, and I was all excited, and then there was all these little sprouts, and I was so excited. It was like, oh my God, it's working. This is the very first garden I had. It was like, this big. It was tiny. And then I had a friend come over, and she said, well, those carrots aren't going to grow. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean they're not going to grow? Well, you have too many of them. They're going to crowd each other out. None of them will grow. So you have to start weeding out your seedlings. What do you mean? I have to weed out the seedlings. I'm so excited they're growing. Well, if you can imagine, if two little carrots are growing right next to each other, the carrots can't get very big. And so you have to start weeding the extra ones. And then you have to weed again. And then you have to weed again until there's enough space for each carrot to grow as big as a carrot normally grows, with a little bit of extra room. So weeding on the outside, one, is learning how to say no, and it's learning how to really allow yourself to weed out the things that are getting in the way. This is very close to pruning. I can remember in my spiritual work when I realized that I needed to prune things out of my life. First of all, I needed to prune some of those obsessive, anxious, like over and over and over and over overthinking things, having conversations with people that weren't even in the room. Like, I had to do a lot of pruning of things that I was thinking that were of no value, that were just keeping me randomly going in whatever it is that I didn't want to be thinking about. Equally as much, I had to prune on the outside. So the first thing I had to look at was all the things that I had said yes to that I actually didn't want to do. All the ways that I'd said yes because I was a people pleaser, or because I thought it was expected of me, or because whatever it is, right? And those are the things that create resentment, obligation, things that we're doing that give us no joy. Of course, there are always things within our jobs and our homes that we have to do because it's part of what's needed. I don't mean those things. I mean, we still have to, I don't know, clean my house and answer the emails, right? So, but there are lots of things that we say yes to that we should in fact be saying no to. So that's one way we prune. That was hard for me to learn, but we have to do it. Then, as we're growing these vibrant lives and things are manifesting and exploding around us, then comes the, for me, even harder pruning. When we get so many beautiful opportunities, options, possibilities, they start unfolding and unfolding and unfolding, and we say yes and yes and yes and yes and yes, and all of a sudden we realize that we are as overwhelmed, anxious, and stressed as we were before. And now we have to prune out. We have to learn to say no to some of the things that we want to say yes to. That's weeding the carrots. Not just the weeds, but weeding the carrots so that some of the carrots can grow. In our human experience, we are somewhat confined by the space-time continuum, and there are so many hours in the day. We can be super, super spiritually exploded. We can expand time. We can do all kinds of things, but we can still overdo it. So, weeding, pruning, inner and outer, and finally, of course, composting. Well, we all know what the best compost is. It's the manure. So our inner composting is working with our shadow, working with all the manure that's back there, and recognizing that when we do that work, we have gold with which to fertilize our soil, because we've done so much work to turn that manure into something really valuable. So this week, you're going to have the opportunity to really look at what needs to be weeded, what needs to be pruned, what needs to be composted, both inner and outer. And these are all a process. And we've just learned how to be patient. So be patient with this process. This is the ongoing engagement with our emerging life. Not only are we growing the garden of our life, but all of this has been about growing our spiritual awareness, our work in our own causal reality that allows us to grow a vibrant, joy-filled, purposeful life. So spend some time in your workbook with your group. Have an opportunity to talk about how you're going to stay together as a group if you choose. Pay attention this week to whatever you're weeding, pruning, and composting. Thanks for being on this Step Out in Faith journey together as we have done this as a whole community. And I simply celebrate the garden of your life that you've been growing and that will continue to emerge.